It's later in the day. No caffeine. 11th edition is around the corner. Let's talk about that.
Here at Tattoo Tabletop, we have a lot of fun, so be sure to like, share, subscribe. It's all completely free, and it helps me out. And if you really want to help me out, come join our Patreon. Link is in the description where you can come post and talk about your favorite minis. Now back to the video.
Welcome to Tattoo Tabletop. My name is James, and today we are talking 11th edition Warhammer 40,000. Obviously, in a couple months, around maybe June, July, we should see 11th edition. We'll probably get some rules previews. We are in the end of the edition events going on. You know, we have 500 Worlds Titus. We've seen that Maelstrom is one of the next ones. So let's talk about what do I think? Well, first of all, what do I think of 10th edition? How do I feel about 10th edition? I honestly think a lot of the rules have been great. I really like the templates. Cover, non-cover, line of sight has been actually pretty clear, which has been great. I think it's led to a lot less speculation on things. You know, people talk about, oh, well, cover needs to be, 50% of the model. And it talks about some of those ratios. I understand the point, but also at the same time, it is going to slow the game down more because now you're going to call a judge over. Is that 50%? Is that 50%? Is this 50%? It gets a little bit more contentious as opposed to, hey, if you can't draw it to both sides of the base, yeah, you have cover or whatever. So all that aside, I really enjoyed 10th edition. I really enjoyed the gameplay. I've really enjoyed the tactical cards. I think they've been great. I think it has helped create more balanced lists because you need to perform any of these actions or these objectives at any time. I'm sure we'll get a shakeup to those, which I'm totally fine with. But the follow-up question is, what 3 things would I change? Because from what we hear out there, 11th edition is going to be more in line with 10.5, which again, I'm fine with. I think 10th edition has been good. I think it makes sense to kind of proceed that way with it. Touch up a few things across the board, see what you can find. But overall, I do think that that's a good idea. But there are still some changes I would make. So let's start right at the beginning with change number 1.
Today's video is sponsored by The Forge for all your hobby nerd needs. Whether it's Warhammer 40k, Age of Sigmar, Marvel Crisis Protocol, Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, Lorcana, and a plethora of board games, The Forge has what you need. The Forge has been my go-to shop, and the inventory has only grown. If there's something you don't see on the shelves, fill out a product request form on their website. Thank you to The Forge for sponsoring this video.
So for change number 1, what would I add? I would add specifically a rule from Age of Sigmar. I have talked about it before in regards to, what rules I would actually change in regards to, specifically Age of Sigmar to 40k, etc. And I can link that right up there. There you go. And one rule I would add is retreating or falling back would give you D3 mortal wounds. Why do I think so? Because one thing that I always found very weird and kind of clunky about Warhammer 40k is the ability to literally just be like, oh my gosh, we're getting absolutely battered and destroyed. All right, well, quick, fall back an inch. And then, your opponent, the enemy unit is just like, I'd kill you if I could reach you, but I can't. Doesn't make sense to me because that's not how that would. And you at that point you have to bank and hope for that you're an army that has a blood surge, and then they're going to shoot you, and then you can surge in or wherever. And even some of those don't even allow you to end in engagement range, so it just kind of makes it tricky. I think suffering D3 mortals makes sense. It makes it so that you do take the risk of falling back. There are still some units that have feel no pains and stuff like that. That would make sense to me. So there's a way to avoid it, but you're still more unlikely taking that damage. And it does add a better advantage for combat armies. I think it gives them a little bit of an edge, or not necessarily an edge, but more teeth to them per se. Because then they're going to tie up your units. And then if you want to get out of that to shoot them, you got to take the damage for it. And again, it's a D3, so it's random. It could be 3, it could be 1. You could lose a Terminator to it. It makes sense. They turn their back on something to walk away from it. It would be problematic. So I do think number 1, the one change, for sure, the number 1 change I'd like to see is retreating, causing more adverse damage. Obviously, if you're battle shocked, you make desperate breakouts, etc., etc. But I think there needs to be a little bit more there. So I think suffering D3 mortals and then still having the battle shock desperate breakout makes sense to me. That would be change number one for me. Change number two, we talks about rerolls. Now, I do think there is a fair amount of rerolls in the game. I know they talked about having significantly less. I definitely understand the meaning behind having the rerolls, and I think it has been what has led to a little bit more tilting in Warhammer 40k. It's more specifically because of the fact that when you do have these rerolls built in, there's a certain mathematical probability added to it. Now, people who use stats, you use it for Age of Sigmar, they use it for 40k, but usually when you add in rerolls, it gives you a certain number. It gives you a feeling, it gives you a certainty, and I don't think it should have that. I don't know. Like I enjoy a little bit of Math Hammer. We all understand that Math Hammer is purely speculative. It's taking a law of averages, and we've all rolled well against the average, right? We've had those moments. We've rolled 7 1s. It has happened. It's very unlikely to happen, but we've all done it, right? So I think removing rerolls could be beneficial, keep things a little bit more fixed, or at least just limit them to very, very specific things. It would make sense if there's a leader character or something that would allow some sort of rerolls of one. And I suppose on some level, I'd also appreciate just like a little bit of cleaning up on some of the languaging, because obviously you have ones that are a hit roll of one, and it's still like, okay, is it all hit rolls of one? Is it? There's been a couple times where I've read a few sentences where I've had to like do it a few times, and then I like usually default go to the other people in that community and be like, okay, they're saying reroll all ones. Okay, so I can go with that. So I think removing some of that could make the game a little bit more engaging in terms of, okay, you're really gambling on something. It's a dice game. Dice are always going to be dice, but I think that could add a nice little element to it as well, and also make for some more interesting thematic moments where you do have a really strong leader character that does offer rerolls and kind of ramps it up. But again, you're also going to have to tweak a lot more to it, and I don't know if that's going to happen. Number three for the changes, honestly, not much in terms of rules. I honestly would just say changing up some of the layouts. Specifically, I know that when it comes to deployments and stuff like that, I would love to see a little bit more changes there, a little bit more balancing out. When I think about something like a Warhammer 40k 10th edition GT, I kind of already have a rough idea of what I'm stepping into, and that's not just because the player packet is available. It's because it's what's going to be the more balanced options. Now, specifically when I think about playing like the Las Vegas Open and playing, I believe, is like Tipping Point and stuff like that. You're dealing with your, 20 on one side, 12 on the other. And I still feel like, well, now it's a little bit better because, fortunately, Las Vegas Open is no longer doing the LVO rows of things, and those were the absolute worst because if you wanted to deep strike or do something on the other side of the board, you either had to arch your back all the way over to really let me just place this guy right here. Oh, my back. Okay, help me up, push me, give me a push. Oh, there we go. Or you had to jog around the other 7 tables to your right to get to the other side and then place your models down. So, talking about deployments, terrain layouts, stuff like that, I think those are the ones that I think we should see a little bit of change on as well. I think that it would be beneficial to shake some of those up because now at this point, we've had 10th edition for the past 3 years. We've had a lot of these deployments for the past 3 years. It would be good to shake it up a little bit more, see if we can find a little bit better layouts. Obviously, there's always going to be UKTC, there's always going to be Games Workshop layouts. In the US, we use a lot of Games Workshop layouts, and there is the UKTC that has different ones, so it's completely different there. But I mean, either way, it'd be good to shake those up for that purpose, along with the secondaries involved, maybe find a few more things. I still think it would be cool for factions to be able to implement a secondary of their own, a thematic secondary of their own. I really enjoyed those. I know the problem being that you had to balance out all the faction secondaries against each other, and that was just kind of like no fun. But like, for example, when like Leagues of Votann came out and you had the secondary that allowed you to claim precious resources where your opponent had to place them outside of their, I made some. I took these little fish rocks, I put them in my Votann basing scheme, and this is an objective marker size, so it's really cool to just give these to my opponent and be like, all right, place these. Like, where do I have to go to claim these? I really enjoyed that secondary. I thought it felt very narrative, but it also felt like a tactical decision, and it felt very fun. So I would love to see something like that come up as well, where factions can maybe have that moment. Maybe it's a once per game effect where it's like, okay, for my other secondary, I'm not going to draw it. I'm going to use this secondary to score X amount of points. Again, balancing them out across all the other factions could be tricky, but I think it would be fun, and that's just a little wish list. But again, if I was going to rank all these, number one, taking mortals on retreat, I think that is a very important one. I think that should be in the game definitively. Number two, being a little bit more picky with the rerolls, I think that would be good. We are in a good spot where I think people intrinsically know it a little bit more, so it's gotten a little bit easier, and games have picked up pace. But of course, number three, changing up the layouts in the secondaries, I think that's just kind of a given. So we'll probably see some of those. But if I could only pick one out of those three, I definitively would pick the taking mortals on retreat. I think that makes a bit more sense for the game, and also it gives combat armies a little bit more wiggle room, because there are some deployments, especially because there are some where the GW layout is very open, so your shooting armies are going to have lanes everywhere. It's a bad time for combat players specifically, which is why the UKTC has theirs and has a little bit more addendums to them to help combat armies out, kind of try and create a better balance. I would love to see that make its way in, so in that way, when combat armies do get into combat with shooting armies, it's kind of forcing those shooting armies to be like, okay, do I just keep these here and try and hold them for a pinch, or do I just retreat, take the mortals, and then try and fire into there? I think that would be a bit more impactful and allow kind of a more interesting interactivity between the two. So those are my top three changes slash wish lists for 11th edition, or AKA 10.5, for Warhammer 40,000. Let me know what you think down in the comments down below. Are these the same ones that you think? What are ones that you would suggest as big changes that you would like to see from 10th edition to 11th edition for Warhammer 40k? Let me know down in the comments. And of course, if you like this content, feel free to like, share, subscribe. We've got a Patreon that I absolutely love. I have fantastic Patreons, and they fortunately keep posting in there, and we share our minis and we share our thoughts and post articles and stuff like that. So it is a lot of fun. And of course, until next time, I've been Tattoo Tabletop. 11th edition is coming, so I suppose I should probably go paint something.